Here, let's watch the
Very
historian.
brutal stuff, plausible. And the whole notion of human rights or that you should treat prisoners of war humanely is a really relatively new concept.
And the Vikings did have slaves. The axe is like it.
Oh, it's okay when historian says it, but when I say it, everyone's like, Pago, Hasan, what about slavery? What did you say about slavery?
Hollywood version of what Vikings were using.
I'm wondering if 9th century Scandinavians would have even imagined an architectural structure like this in the afterlife, but it's real pretty. My name is Rachel Hill. I am an assistant professor in the history department at Cal Poly Pomona.
And I'm Sarah Lacey. I'm a professor of archaeology and anthropology, and we are about to watch Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Exciting. We're gonna see some cool tattoos and hairstyles, I'm sure.
And once we're no longer in COVID lockdown, I'm gonna take some of these ideas to my tattoo artist.
All right, let's watch.
There's not a lot of sanitation going on here, though, with this drink.
Which would have been accurate.
Yeah, probably. Alcohol kills bacteria, so.
Right, drinking that mead. These horns that they're drinking out of, too, seems legit.
Well, at least based on what I've seen in movies.
Killer hangover from mead, though, I have to say.
The earliest evidence we have of fermented beverages is probably about 9,000 years old from clay vessels, both in the Middle East and in China, suggesting people have been fermenting alcohol for quite a while. But if you look even at primates, they like to eat fermented fruit from the forest. The percentage of teetotalers versus alcoholics is about the same as it is in humans, so that suggests that we've had a liking for alcohol for quite a while.
They've found all number of things to ferment in order to get drunk, right? I mean, honey, grain, fruit, we're really good at that.
I like the choice of home decor.
Yeah, I'm loving the details. Video games have come a long way since Ms. Pac-Man.
I mean, I decorate my house in animal skulls, actually, so.
Well, that makes sense for someone who studies the prehistoric periods. What about this makeup? What do you think of the eye makeup?
You can mix charcoal and animal fat. I like that we have a female protagonist.
Definitely.
Which we do have evidence of in the Viking period.
Right, shield maidens, yeah?
Yeah, there's a number of like Viking warrior burials that have turned out to be female.
Sorry, have you started?
Fucking called it! I called this too.
Yes, obviously. I said.
Wait, I thought someone in the chat literally said shield maidens when we were talking about this. I thought someone in the chat literally said the shield maidens were made up. Must have been a fucking incel.
You're probably too scared to face me.
Ooh, but they're already pre-rhymed for you.
Insults in rhyme form. A Viking rap battle.
It's the weakest attempt I've yet heard to disgrace me.
The graffiti that I'd seen from the Orkney Isles that the Vikings had left included like describing someone's wife as a real babe and then drawing a dog next to it. And I was like, those insults haven't changed in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
You're a sprat. You whine like a little brat.
I'm actually surprised not to see any mother insults. I mean, from what I know, those are also really old. Go for the mother and the wife. That's the ultimate.
Oh, they did have textiles. So showing them with like wool textiles, there's those mummies that have tartan wool that have been found even as far east as China that have been associated with Viking excursions. So that doesn't surprise me, and like the embroidery seems plausible. Certainly furs, I mean, that goes back to the Paleolithic.
The more embroidery, the more fancier, high status the person, usually, right?
Yeah.
That's...
Society like this where you take your status into death, I would assume that they'd be buried in those items, but they don't preserve particularly well in burials. Well, Vikings had pretty extensive trade networks, so having merchants that would be selling items from even thousands of miles away seems plausible.
I mean, that was a big drive in their wars of conquest, right? Is to establish trade contacts.
And they were trading with people they hadn't conquered, right? Monopolizing amber in the Circumbaltic region and trading that further south, which is how maybe they're getting wine. We do know that they're eating a lot of fish by looking at the carbon and nitrogen isotopes in their bones from burials, but I mean, that's not surprising, right? Humans eat what's local, except now. And certainly like drying fish would make sense because it's a good way to get it lasting. There's different seasons for certain kinds of fish depending on migration patterns, and so if you want to have access to that fish in other parts of the year, or especially over the winter, smoking, salting, drying.
Look at this massive structure here.
Some pretty impressive architecture. Suggests someone with a lot of power who can recruit a lot of individuals to come to one place to build this. It feels a little hyperbolic, because even some of the big like buildings you see in Finland, for instance, all this architecture are a lot smaller.
I'm unclear about these carpets that we're seeing as well, if that's something they would have had access to through trade.
I mean, we know they trade with Persia.
Okay, well, there you go.
There's a lot that we don't know about the Vikings because they are highly nomadic. They're building with wood, which doesn't preserve as well. The people who are writing down their history are the people they're raiding. So those people are gonna write a history that doesn't necessarily represent how the Vikings view themselves. They're also
Writing and record keeping at the time was extremely limited. And mostly in the hands of the religious. But not only that, but one of the most insane things from that era that I think about a lot is that European history, literally for, I guess, like between what? The fall of Rome all the way up until, from the fall of Rome all the way up until like the fucking, what would I say, like Renaissance and Reformation, is just nothing. Like they just went back in time, or Enlightenment. But I feel like throughout the Dark Ages, their entire fucking history is, throughout the Dark Ages, their entire history is like accelerating at such a slow pace. It's crazy. Especially when we talk about, like, I mean, especially about the Saxons. Wait, why are people getting mad at me about this? Bro, this is all a lie? The only reason we still have access to classical Roman literature is because of the Byzantine scholars and Irish monks who preserved them through the Dark Ages? From 200 to 800, there's nothing at all? Bro, in comparison to the acceleration of technology that you see, in comparison to the acceleration and evolution of technology that you see leading up to that era, the Dark Ages trope was debunked. It was a debunked myth by now. In comparison to any other, like, acceleration of technology and expansion of technology and everything else, I feel like societal formations went back.
Roses are red. Sleepers are banned. Science paused again. I've had all I can stand.
Those Byzantine monks of the past, what mischief will be for the future with Pokemon cards?
Hi
Here,
there,
let's
my
do
name
that.
is John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about the Dark Ages.
I'd like to cancel
possibly
my
the most
socialism
egregious
free trial.
Eurocentrism in all of history, which is really saying something. We're Europe. The Prime Meridian runs through us. We're in the middle of every map, and
And I'm obviously not comparing it to, like, the Islamic Golden Age. Clearly, I'm just talking about it from a Eurocentric point of view.
continent, even though we're not a continent. But let's begin today with a pop quiz. What was the best year of your life? And what was the worst year?
1453.
Mr. Green, best 1994, worst 1990. Oh, me from the past. It gets so much better and also so much worse. For worst year, I'm going to go with 2001. Best year, 2006. All right, now it's your turn, dear pupil. Share your best and worst years in comments during the intro.
1453.
Right, so what you'll quickly find is that your worst year was someone else's best year. So too with history. The period between 600 and 1450 CE is often called the Middle Ages in Europe because it came between the Roman Empire, assuming you forget about the Byzantines, and the beginning of the modern age. And it's sometimes called the Dark Ages because it was so purportedly unenlightened. But was the age really so dark? Depends on what you find depressing. If you like cities and great poetry, then the Dark Ages were indeed pretty dark in Europe. But if, like me, your two favorite things are not dying from wars and not dying from anything else, then the Dark Ages actually weren't that bad, at least until the plague came in the 14th century. And meanwhile, outside of Europe, the Dark Ages were truly an age of enlightenment, but we'll get boring Europe out of the way first. Let's go to the thought bubble. Medieval Europe had less trade, fewer cities, and less cultural output than the...
This is what I was referencing. In comparison to the Roman Empire, they literally fucking went back in time.
The original Roman Empire. London and Paris were fetid fire traps with none of the planning or sewage management of places 5,000 years older like Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley civilization, let alone Rome. But with fewer powerful governments, wars were at least smaller, which is one reason why Europeans living in medieval times... Oh, thought bubble, I knew you were gonna do that.
You were still wrong? No, I'm not.
People in medieval times lived slightly longer. Life expectancy was 30 than Europeans during the Roman Empire, when life expectancy was 28. Instead of centralized governments, Europe in the Middle Ages had feudalism, a political system based on reciprocal relationships between lords, who owned lots of land, and vassals, who protected the land and got to dress up as knights in exchange for pledging loyalty to the lords. The lords were also vassals to more important lords, with the most important of all being the king. Below the knights were peasants, who did the actual work on the land in exchange for protection from bandits and other threats. Feudalism was also an economic system, with the peasants working the land and keeping some of their production to feed themselves while giving the rest to the landowner whose land they worked. The small-scale local nature of the feudal system was perfect for a time and place where the threats to people's safety were also small-scale and local. But of course, this system reinforces the status quo. There's little freedom and absolutely no social mobility. Peasants could never work their way up to lords, and they almost never left their villages. Thanks, Thought Bubble. One more point that's really interesting from a world history perspective. This devolution from empire to localism has happened in lots of places at lots of different times. And in times of extreme political stress, like after the fall of the Han Dynasty in China, power tends to flow into the hands of local lords who can protect the peasants better than the state can. We hear a lot about this in Chinese history and also in contemporary Afghanistan, but instead of being called feudal lords, these landlords are called warlords. Eurocentrism striking again. The other reason the Dark Ages are called dark is because Europe was dominated by superstition and by boring religious debates about like how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. And while there's something to that, the Middle Ages also saw theologians like Thomas Aquinas, who was quite an important philosopher, and women like Hildegard of Bingen, who wrote all this important liturgical music and also basically invented the genre of the morality play. All that noted, things were certainly brighter in the Islamic world, or Dar al-Islam. So when we
I don't know why most of my chat is usually r/atheist, like full of r/atheist dipshits. But as soon as it touches like Euro supremacy, they forget all about how like religion is bad, and literally had this like insane reaction when a big chunk of the reason why the Dark Ages were so dark was literally because of Christianity. Like, it's really interesting seeing the conflicting opinions that a lot of you hold, like the conflicting points of view that you have. Meanwhile, Islam was pretty good at this stage, so there's that too.
Left the Muslims, they had expanded out of their homeland in Arabia and conquered the rich Egyptian provinces of the Byzantines and the entire Sasanian Empire, all in the space.
That falls in line with the argument. That's what I'm saying. Like, a big part of the Dark Age being so dark is literally directly because of Christianity, and yet they are, instead of utilizing that, otherwise they're very fucking mad at Christianity, utilizing that against Christianity. Instead of doing that, they're like, no, fuck you. The Dark Ages were not dark. That's not real.
of about 100 years. The Umayyad dynasty then expanded the empire west to Spain and moved the capital to Damascus because it was closer to the action empire-wise, but still technically in Arabia. That was really important to the Umayyads because they'd established this hierarchy with the Arabs like them at the top, and in fact they tried to keep Arabs from fraternizing with non-Arab Muslims throughout the empire. This of course annoyed the non-Arab Muslims who were like, I don't know if you're reading the same Quran we are, but this one says that we're all supposed to be equal. And pretty quickly a majority of Muslims weren't Arabs, which made it pretty easy for them to overthrow the Umayyads, which they did in 750 CE. Their replacements, the Abbasids. Abbasids? Hold on.
Abbasid or Abbasid.
Ah, I'm right twice! Right, so the
Abbasid.
Abbasids were from the Abbasi, or Abbasi family, which hailed from one of the eastern and therefore more Persian provinces of the Islamic Empire. The Abbasids took over in 750, and no one could fully defeat them until 1258 when they were conquered by, wait for it, the Mongols. The Abbasids kept the idea of a hereditary monarchy, but they moved the capital of the empire to Baghdad.
Okay, but this fucking bullshit. They're not talking about how I want a Eurocentric approach to the Dark Ages, not like what the other cultures and civilizations were doing and how much better they were than Europe at the time.
And they were much more welcoming of non-Arab Muslims into positions of power. And under the Abbasids, the Dar al-Islam took on a distinctly Persian cast that it never really lost. The Caliph now styled himself as a king of kings, just like the Achaemenids had, and pretty soon the Caliph's rule was a lot more indirect, just like the original Persians. This meant that his control was much weaker, and by about 1000 CE,
actual history is more fun than art history, in my opinion.
The Islamic Caliphate, which looked so incredibly impressive on a map, had really descended into a series of smaller kingdoms, each paying lip service to the Caliph in Baghdad. This was partly because the Islamic Empire relied more and more on soldiers from the frontier, in this case the Turks, and also slaves pressed into military service in order to be the backbone of their army, a strategy that has been tried over and over again and has worked exactly 0 times, which you should remember if you ever become an emperor. Actually, our resident historian points out that that strategy has worked, if you are the Mongols. More important than the Persian-style monarchy that the Abbasids set up was their openness to foreigners and their ideas. That tolerance and curiosity ushered in a golden age of Islamic learning centered in Baghdad. The Abbasids oversaw an effervescence of culture unlike anything that had been seen since Hellenistic times. Arabic replaced Greek not only as the language of commerce and religion, but also of culture. Philosophy, medicine, and poetry were all written in Arabic, although Persian remained an important...
La 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 la, I don't want to believe you. Or, sorry, it would be more like, la 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 la, I do not want to believe you. This is bullshit. None of this is relevant or real. I do not want to hear you. What you're saying is absolute nonsense. Nonsense, I tell you.
Literary language. And Baghdad became the world's center of scholarship with its house of wisdom and immense library. Muslim scholars translated the works of Greek philosophers, including Aristotle and Plato, as well as scientific works by Hippocrates, Archimedes, and especially the physician Galen. And they translated and preserved Buddhist and Hindu manuscripts that might otherwise have been lost. Muslims made huge strides in medicine as well. One Muslim scholar, Ibn Sina, wrote the Canon of Medicine, which became the standard medical textbook for centuries in both Europe and the Middle East. And the Islamic Empire adopted mathematical concepts from India, such as the zero, a number so fascinating and beautiful that we could write an entire episode about it, but instead, I'm just gonna write it a little love poem. Oh, zero, pretty little zero, they say you're nothing, but you mean everything to mathematical history, and me.
Europeans call him Avicenna, Ibn Sina.
Oh, it's time for the open letter? An open letter to science and religion. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, champagne poppers. Stan, what am I supposed to do with these? Dear science and religion, you're supposed to be so irreconcilable and everything, but not so much in the Abbasid Empire. I mean, Muslim mathematicians expanded math to such a degree that we now call the base 10 number system and the symbols we use to denote it Arabic numerals. And religion was at least part of what pushed all—
Arabic numerals? I don't like it! We need them American numerals, brother. I heard that our alphabet is Latiner. I don't like that. Latin alphabet, Arabic numerals. What the fuck are they teaching my goddamn kids in school? Stop the count. This is why we need to do homeschooling, brother.
all that learning forward. Like the great philosopher Ibn Rushd argued that the only path to religious enlightenment was through Aristotelian reasoning, and Muslim mathematicians and astronomers developed algebra partly so they could simplify Islamic inheritance law. Plus, they made important strides in trigonometry to help people understand where to turn when trying to turn toward Mecca. You were working so well together, science and religion, but then, like Alan Tipper Gore, just couldn't last forever. Nothing gold can stay in this world. Nothing gold can stay. Best wishes, John Green. Baghdad wasn't the only center of learning in the Islamic world. In Spain, Islamic Cordoba became a center for the arts, especially architecture. This is perhaps best exemplified by the Great Mosque at Cordoba, built by the Umayyad ruler Abd al-Rahman I in 785 to 786 CE. That's right, this building, still standing today and one of the most amazing mosques in the world, was built in a year, whereas medieval cathedrals took like a million years to finish. The Muslims of Spain were
some of them not finished yet.
Also engineers who rivaled the Romans. Aqueducts in Cordoba brought drinkable water into the city, and Muslim scholars took the lead in agricultural science, improving yields on all kinds of new crops, allowing Spanish lives to be longer and less hungry. Everybody wanted to live in Spain. Even the greatest Jewish philosopher Maimonides wanted to live in Spain.
Wait, you say I thought Spain was Catholic? Yeah, there was a point in time when it wasn't, brother.
But sadly, he was expelled and ended up in Alexandria, Egypt. There he wrote his awesomely titled Defense of Rationality, A Guide for the Perplexed. I'm translating the title, of course, because the original text was written in Arabic. Meanwhile, China was having a golden age of its own. The Tang dynasty made China's government more of a meritocracy and ruled over 80 million people across 4 million square miles. And they might have conquered all of Central Asia had it not been for the Abbasids, whom they fought at the most important battle you've never heard of, the Battle of the Talus River. This was like the Ali Frazier of the 8th century, and the Abbasids won, which ended up defining who had...
That's why the Spanish are Turks. And by way of the Spanish, both the indigenous population, also Turks, and the Spanish colonizers, also Turks. So that way, Latin America is also Turkish. South Americans, also Turks.
Cultural influence where, with the Abbasids dominating to the west of the river and China dominating to the east. The Tang also produced incredible art that was traded all throughout Asia. And many of the more famous sculptures from the Tang dynasty feature figures who are distinctly not Chinese, which again demonstrates the diversity of the empire. The Tang was also a golden age for Chinese poetry, with notables like Du Fu and Li Ba plying their craft, encouraged by the official government. And the Sung dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1258, kicked even more ass, it's not cursing if you're talking about donkeys. By the 11th century, Chinese metalworkers were producing as much iron as Europe would be able to produce in the 18th century. Some of this iron was put to use in new plows, which enabled agriculture to boom, thereby supporting population growth. Porcelain was of such high quality that it was shipped throughout the world, which is why we now call it China. And there was so much trade going on that the Chinese ran out of metal for coins, leading to another innovation, paper money. And by the 11th century, the Chinese were writing down their recipe for a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal that we now know as gunpowder. That becomes kind of a big deal in history, paving the way as it does for modern warfare and arena rock.
1453, utilization of massive cannons to take down walls that contributed in significant ways to the end of the feudal era and feudal lordships, as monarchies or kings were able to utilize gunpowder and massive cannons to blow up these big walls inside of where lords existed. I've had so many arguments with fascists that deny all these achievements of other civilizations. I think the best way to counter fascists is by talking about Chinese, like Chinese and Japanese innovation, but specifically Chinese innovation, because without the Chinese, like, let's say, fuck the Turks or whatever, but without the Chinese, like, you have no, a fundamental part of your culture does not exist. You know what I mean? Like, wars aren't fought in the same way. Like, it's so dumb. And it's so dumb that it's, like, virtually unavoidable.
Who loved the Twitch stream that he ran. He looked at his
no
chat
paper, no
sleepers and
gunpowder.
sat and
Like,
hit them all with
how
a
do
van.
you survive? How do you have culture or history without that? So, I mean, it's just like, of course, these fascists are oftentimes like looking at history from a totally ahistorical and totally mythologized point of view. that like really beefs up their own personal history. That the remnants of that cultural understanding are so pervasive that people, I think, had a negative reaction to what I was saying about the Dark Ages in Europe. Like, that's part of the reason. I think because people feel, people get mad. They're like, well, how dare you say that? It's like, no, dude, Europe fucking sucked. Like, literally sucked. They were living in filth. It is remarkable in comparison to what the Romans were able to achieve. Like, they just basically were like, all right, well, these are cities. We're just going to live in them, but we're going to live in them like fucking animals. Anyway. But that's the reason why people get mad. There's a reason historians see these locations differently during this time. Your original point is still correct. Yeah, when I was talking about Dark Ages, I was absolutely referencing just Europe, and I specified it as such. Obviously, someone who learned history at a different part of the fucking world would clearly not learn about the European Dark Ages in the same way.
Pyrotechnics and, oh, that's why. Not so dark after all. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next.
Dark Ages weren't really all that dark from a philosophical or scientific perspective. Most historians dispute the idea of Dark Ages. No. The only way to dispute the Dark Ages is if you dispute it from the point of view of like the rest of the world was not necessarily in the Dark Ages, which is true. That's why you don't learn about it as like the Dark Ages.
State the prowess of the Vikings
anywhere
because
else.
They want to justify why they got taken over, right? So these are like short little hungry men from Norway who are trying to escape a famine, and they're described as these like 6 feet tall giants coming down because you want to explain.
You're not countering fascism. You're literally saying ahistorical shit. Even historians don't consider European Middle Ages as Dark Ages. You're legit lying. In comparison to the advancements made by preceding cultures and civilizations, technological achievements were few and Dark Ages is an ahistorical term. Okay, I was wrong. They actually didn't live in feudal lordships,
small, hungry man
an incredibly decentralized, peasantry-focused governance that did not really advance all that much. I'm wrong. They weren't fucking barbarians. I'm wrong about that as well. It's just totally made up. I made all of that up. They were actually doing fucking sick. There was never anything that you could consider. There's never anything that you could consider. They didn't get owned by fucking rats. That's also bullshit. The plague is bullshit. Losing all their fucking historical texts and all of that, like all of that's bullshit. All of that is bullshit. None of that actually ever happened. I am being ahistorical. Let's take a look at the PragerU.
No period of history is more misunderstood or underappreciated than the Middle Ages. The 10 centuries from the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century to the start of the Renaissance in the 15th. This is especially true between the year 1000, when global warming brought grapes to England and grain to the coasts of Greenland, doubling the population and reviving town life all across Europe, and 1348, after the warming had ended and the Black Death arrived from the east. Let's take a closer look at these years. We'll make a good start by dispelling some nonsense. The people of the Middle Ages did not believe the earth was flat. They knew it was round. The ancients said it was round.
Okay, that's not false. He's right about that.
Fathers of the church.
He's literally not wrong about that. This might be the only factually correct take in a PragerU video ever.
Said it was round. They saw its shadow during an eclipse of the moon, and the shadow was round. They saw masks of ships sinking below the horizon.
Wait, it's very confusing. This is literally the first time when PragerU is correct about something.
More nonsense. The Middle Ages were cheerless. Quite the reverse. They were full of color, of celebrations involving everybody in town. They invented the carnival. They revived popular drama, which had lain dormant for 1,000 years. Whatever they did, whether it was sinning or fighting or repenting or falling in love or traveling thousands of miles to Rome or to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they did it with energy and gusto.
What?
What do we owe to the Middle?
So they walked around? So it wasn't as bad, dude? What? Is it just walking, dude? I'm just walking and I'm marching with energy and
Hasan,
gusto,
you complain
dude.
that chat doesn't send you funny TTS, but how would you know when you consistently don't wall us? Like right now I'm being walled, bro, you're not listening. This could be the
This is
funniest
true.
TTS ever and you wouldn't know.
This is true.
Middle Ages. How about the
This is so disingenuous. So many historians have argued that Europe wasn't fucking was
University.
dark during the Middle Ages. I don't give a fuck what these inbred conservative fascists
medieval
think.
man invented it? For the first time in the history of the world, you could go to Paris or Bologna or Padua or Oxford or Prague or Cologne and study under masters of law, medicine, philosophy, and theology, and your degree designating you as a man.
Bitch, who? Like, yeah, if you fucking owned shit, what do you mean, dude? Dude. Yeah, no. Oh, it wasn't the Dark Ages because, you know, everyone was just traveling around doing carnivals and learning law, medicine, philosophy, dude. What the fuck? What? This is so good.
Master or a doctor would hold good anywhere in Europe. It was an international community of scholars. A young Thomas Aquinas, born in southern Italy at the beginning of the 13th century, would travel to Cologne to study philosophy under the philosopher-biologist Albert the Great, then to Paris, where he taught theology and philosophy, then to Rome and back to France. And this sort of thing was the rule among scholars, not the exception. How about modern science? Thomas's teacher, Albert, was a biologist. Why should that surprise us? Medieval man believed that God made the world as an ordered whole. They learned it both from scripture and from pagan thinkers such as Aristotle. Science did not burst on the scene with Galileo. Copernicus died.
Yeah, fuck Galileo, dude. All my homies hate Galileo. That bitch. Fucking, how dare they shit on the church, dude? Yo, fuck you. The church was leading the science. Is this back when PragerU was a real university? No, they were never a real university. These people jerk off 800-year-old philosophers and they say you wasted your degree if it's not fucking construction. Also true.
In the 16th century, but he was a priest astronomer at a Polish university founded in the Middle Ages. He wasn't even the first man to suggest that the Earth orbited the sun. Others had ventured the suggestion. Most prominent was the late medieval Nicholas of Cusa, a philosopher and a cardinal in the church. How about architecture? If the Middle Ages were dark and ignorant, how come ordinary people, masons, carpenters, painters, sculptors, glazers, erected the most beautiful and majestic buildings to grace the earth, the Gothic cathedrals, without power tools, with pulleys and winches and scaffolding in their bare hands, they built up lacework in stone and glass, flooding vast interior spaces with color and light. We have nothing to match their complexity and beauty. And art? Studying the ancients, medieval
Dude, I feel like every time PragerU talks about history, I don't know why it feels like they're justifying it. Like, am I crazy? I mean, I guess people say the same thing about me whenever I talk about, like, I don't know, Ottoman history and shit. So maybe I'm like I feel like they're overlooking a big chunk of history when they are making it seem as though like everybody was just like living and fucking and roaming and walking and building cathedrals. Also, notice how like in this timeline I like that there was a point in time where he starts off by saying the fall of Rome, or at least like, you know, the eastern, or not eastern, sorry, the Western Roman Empire as we know it, and not the Greek Orthodox Byzantine Empire. And then he jumps directly to here. Like, I feel like there was a big chunk that he just skipped over, hard skipped, and was like, you know, Thomas Aquinas and Nicholas of Cusa and cathedrals. Like, what happened in between that area? Like, I feel like there was some time there that you just kind of hard skipped. All the way to like the 1400s with.
Better be described as the brilliant.
Did you even watch the video? He wasn't super detailed, but he definitely talked about it.
Ages. A startling epic of progress from science to art, from philosophy to medicine. Indeed, in one crucial way, we are less civilized than those who enhanced human existence over 1,000 years ago. We dismiss the achievements of our ancestors and fall short of them. They honored their ancestors and surpassed them.
What? Yeah, we talked about Robert Lee. I did a little research, and I think the amount I've done has allowed me to say that there's a real academic debate about the Dark Ages. I think we shouldn't watch PragerU Psychos and maybe watch somebody else. Literally everything he's talking about is just before the Renaissance. No fucking shit. They got better at stuff literally after 1,000 years. Yeah. That's what I said, and people got mad at me originally. And of course, like, listen, Dark Ages is a Eurocentric approach. It's not fucking Dark Ages for anywhere else. As what was my take as well. But look, if you have a counter to that, and if you're going to tell me that after the fall of the Roman Empire that society still advanced at a similar clip in Europe, and maybe I'm totally wrong on it because you were making it seem as though I was, then I'm willing to be open-minded about it. I get your meme trying to deconstruct the fascist ideas of Europe being some bastion of civilization anyways, but the European Dark Ages are a construct that's pretty disputed by historians as being relevant.
We've all heard of the term Dark Ages, that medieval period in which all learning stopped and everything became terrible. It's a term attributed to Petrarch, who, like later Renaissance thinkers, thought that the Middle Ages were...
Look, this also doesn't mean that, like, that during the Islamic Golden Age, like, everything was poggers in the Muslim world, or that the Asian empires were always super advanced or anything like that. It's just that society didn't necessarily evolve as fast as it did, as it did under the Roman Empire.
Were a period of
that was my
darkness in
point.
comparison to the classical period from before and the Renaissance after. So just to let you know, the
You only care about the Dark Ages being important because you want the Byzantine Empire to be legit strong in order for the Ottoman achievement of taking it over to sound more grand? No, dude. That's so dumb. No.
definition of dark
Like, if anything, you could make the argument that, like, the Byzantines got fucking owned at the tail end. Like, it's not an accomplishment. The true accomplishment is how long they fucking survived, despite being surrounded. So,
Dark Ages has changed since the days of Petrarch. Nowadays it's a very specific term, but be aware that Dark Ages isn't synonymous with Middle Ages. It refers exclusively to Western Europe in the couple of centuries following the collapse of the Roman Empire. Of course, the question is, how true is the commonly held vision of this period? Were the Dark Ages really that dark and unenlightened? Well, in a word, no. In a sentence, not really, but also a little bit, depending on where and where you're talking about. So Western Europe had largely been united under the rule of the Roman Empire, and after its collapse it was divided into competing realms. There's obviously too many to speak of in any sort of detail, so we'll pick two extremes and compare them. The former province of Italia and that of Britannia, whose experiences of the Dark Ages are proof that they weren't quite as awful as is often made out to be. So in Britannia, after the Romans left...
bro, the dude who was like, "You're fucking wrong," literally sent me this video, and the video is basically saying exactly what I said.
Things went really well. Just kidding, they fell apart almost immediately. Things like a coin-based economy, urban living and literacy died out there within a generation. Whereas in places like the Ostrogothic Kingdom, which occupied the former province of Italia and then some, very little changed. And whilst yes, it did now have a Germanic ruler, King Theodoric, he swore fealty to the Roman Emperor in the east. The Senate continued to meet in Rome and the Pope's rights were respected, although the official church of the Ostrogoths was centred in Ravenna. As for urban living, the number of people in towns and cities had declined massively in most places. Rome's population had declined from roughly 1 million people in the 3rd century to about 50,000 during the Ostrogothic period. But what about the peasantry? How did life change for them after Rome had gone? Well, frankly, not very much. Most people were born, lived and died working as agricultural labourers on the same farm as their forebears had. Localised famines were also much more common and couldn't be alleviated by a centralised authority, meaning that local starvation was much more common. This largely went away in Ostrogothic Italy when it was conquered in the 6th century by the Eastern Roman Empire, known then as the Roman Empire, which undermines Petrarch's notion of the post-Roman world being an unenlightened one because the Romans never went away. The Dark Ages did see many intellectual achievements though. Monasteries like Lindisfarne...
It's like when you wanna say that the Roman Empire was ended by the Ottomans, that's not true because that was the Byzantines. When you want to defend the Dark Ages as not being so dark, then no, the Byzantines are Romans, so they never actually went away. Technically, both is literally true. The main distinction being religion or whatever religious sect you have. But you do hear, you're seeing people play fast and loose with the Roman distinction there for sure. Roman Empire was dope though, for sure. I mean,
Lindisfarne and Monk Wearmouth Jarrow produced great historians like Bede. In the Ostrogothic Kingdom, Boethius wrote the Consolation of Philosophy, which is one of the most important medieval texts ever written. And in terms of architecture, buildings like Theodoric's Mausoleum are testament to the fact that in the Dark Ages, things weren't as dark as they may seem. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for...
That was it? Okay, we're done. Romans or Greeks 2.0 legit. 90% of the gods are copied with different names. You could say everyone copied the Greeks because everyone copied the Romans. Okay. All right. right, we're done. Let's get back to the fucking the ultimate Stunlocked, which was
Why it is that you got your butt kicked. You know, what we know of them is what other people have described them as, and they're not leaving a lot of architecture, right? They like to conquer, they don't like to stick around and rule.
I'd imagine the settlements would be relatively small, except for maybe sort of trading centers, like certain urban centers where there was markets. You might have denser populations. We're sort of seeing the movers and shakers in the video games. It's not really that fun to play a Viking peasant that's out in the rural area just tending their fields, I'm sure. From what I understand, the Vikings had something like kings.
No serfs. It's not like
yeah,
a serf
not
structure.
like a strictly feudal society, but I just, you know, the majority of the people would have been concerned with the immediate needs of growing food to eat and stockpiling enough to make it through winters, right? The majority of the people weren't the folks that are out there raiding settlements and conquering territories.
And it's a pretty seasonal environment, right? So winter is long. The worst part of the year is like early spring, where you're running out of the stuff from the winter, but the stuff you've been planting isn't producing yet. That's a great time to go raid. Well, I think with a lot of the raids, I mean, you're going after clumped resources, right? So the reason why we think of them going after monasteries, because they have lots of gold and they're not very good fighters. You're going to be strategic about like the cost-benefit analysis of where you're raiding, and probably monks are not particularly retaliatory.
And that would probably determine the size of the raiding party as well, right? Depending on what your target was. Yeah, here they are at a monastery.
Exactly. That's where the money is.
Yeah, get those gold goblets and candlesticks. What do you think about the weaponry here?
I mean, you see the axe as like a Hollywood version of what Vikings were using. I'm not really sure whether that's accurate.
Yeah.
Though I did slice my finger open on a Viking axe in Sweden one time.
Oh my goodness.
Did not realize how sharp it was.
And they're mostly wielding them with their hand, which I think that makes more sense than sort of throwing axes. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I don't think so. That requires a level of accuracy.
Yeah.
But certainly they had swords.
Some real up close and personal combat here. There he goes, right into the sanctuary, get that gold.
Again, that's why you're so concerned about making sure it's a fight you're gonna win, because when it's close contact, right, you're not using like projectiles. You wanna make sure that you live the encounter.
A lot of conversion happening during this time they were political decisions more so than necessarily a heartfelt religious one. To make political alliances, conversion to Christianity was a good strategy for a lot of folks.
And doesn't mean that individual peasants are actually following through with, you know, the belief or the practices. Hence why we have so many pagan practices now incorporated into modern Christianity.
Yeah, and often kind of a top-down thing. People who are sort of high status convert. The average peasant is still out here talking about Odin and
praying to tree spirits.
Right.
Oh, hey, that's some pecs.
That's some good old-fashioned torture happening, maybe. Is that why he's hanging upside down?
I wonder if
Ivar the Boneless
actually a problem.
Oh my goodness. Very brutal stuff, plausible. The whole, notion of human rights or that you should treat prisoners of war humanely is a really relatively new concept. Geneva Conventions only happened after World War II. If you were captured on the battlefield, if you weren't enslaved for life, you may very well have been subject to some very harsh treatment.
And the Vikings did have slaves. Though these hairstyles look awesome, and certainly I've seen people around town trying to replicate them, we probably don't have a great idea of the kind of hairstyles they're doing because that's not preserved in burials. And the art at the time is like very simplistic, very two-dimensional. I don't know how you would represent someone who's got like half their head shaved when you're just drawing people from the side. But we do have
Wait, you saw fucking made up?
some mummies from southern Siberia that do have some braided hair and some pretty cool tattoos.
I thought, wait, is this made up? I thought like the longer your fucking hair is in Viking culture, the higher your rank was, right? Or is that made up? Hold on. Longer hair is more practical, as long hair would shield from the intense cold as to cover the ears. Viking hairstyle. We have two witnesses for the hairs. The Norseman, Leo the Deacon, in his history written about. Leo describes how John I Tzimiskis, a Byzantine emperor, met Sviatoslav, Prince of Kievan Rus, in July 971. Whether Leo himself was present at the meeting is unclear. Carl Benedict Hayes, critical edition. You make Game of Thrones? This is Dothraki? No. I don't even remember that from the Dothraki. But isn't it crazy how Chuds have co-opted Vikings and ancient Greeks? Do you have any comments on why that is? I don't know why. I mean, Vikings are... I don't know why. I don't know where the fucking Viking shit comes from. I guess they're also like... There's like a little bit of paganism with... There's a little bit of paganism with the Vikings. It just comes from like being conquerors and like mythologizing white history. I think it's literally because they're white. I mean, they mythologize Romans too. And those motherfuckers weren't white. Like literally not white. And neither were like ancient Greeks either.
Thank you, Hasan Blob Dads.
I read in the past the right wing were Europhobic, but the new alt-right wave is more Europhile. I mean, they say Jesus is white, so it's not that crazy. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. What do you mean, white?
Life is like a hurricane here in Bugsnax. Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes. It's a bug blur. Might catch a snackery or eat a snowbie. Bugsnax. Woo. Everyday dare out there catching Bugsnax.
Nazis loving ancient Romans and Greeks is so stupid. They thought ancient Germans were dumb barbarians. Yeah, dumb barbarians that they couldn't fucking conquer, though. I mean, they were dumb barbarians, but, or like literal barbarians, but barbarians that put up a better fight than the rest of the world at the time. Barbarians were just non-Greeks. Barbarian is Latin for foreigner. They weren't even German. Okay, let's
go to archaeology conferences and you see many people with replicas of those tattoos.
Called me boneless because I move like a reed in the wind.
I would have assumed he was...
Some barbarians is the Turkic horse mater in the steppes. Bro, this is the thing that I don't understand. It's like, dude, we're so fucking far removed from that history. Like, you think I give a fuck? Oh, man, I'm so mad, dude. What? Like, oh, no, I can't believe you said the fucking Turks were horse maters in the steppes, dude. Whoa. Like, I hate these fucking 4chan level takes.
Was boneless for having like skeletal deformities, thinking like Richard III with his scoliosis.
Yeah, these are the theories that I've heard as well, that he was born with some kind of congenital disability and that's where the name came
right?
from.
Or something? Valhalla. That is where I am bound. I can smell the blood and taste the meat.
Yeah, I mean, that seems accurate. They weren't afraid to die. You get
gotta
to go to Valhalla.
You're not going to be a good warrior culture if you don't have a strong belief in an afterlife or some sort of reward for your behavior.
And be reunited with people that you lost on the battlefield. Yeah. Ooh.
Is that like the Rainbow Bridge?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
It does seem a little bit influenced by Marvel Universe, perhaps, but...
Yeah, I'm wondering if 9th century Scandinavians would have even imagined an architectural structure like this in the afterlife. But it's real pretty.
We don't want to underestimate their ability to be imaginative.
Sure. Are we gonna get to see Odin?
And there are, hallucinogenic mushrooms growing in the area, so we don't want to deny their ability to take advantage of those.
And visit Odin.
Is there an elevator? Because that's a really high tower.
Well, he's just gonna go for it, it looks like. I mean, he's in Asgard, so what could go wrong?
Gravity doesn't have to apply.
No. Is that supposed to be Freya?
Thor, so definitely these are gods.
Yeah, hence the real fancy clothing, right? It would have been very high status. What's higher than a god?
Any pieces that are made from like multiple materials is typically pretty high status.
I'm digging the beads in the beard. I don't know how accurate it is, but I like it.
You could find that in a burial, I would imagine.
Is he bringing Thor with him into battle? It can't hurt to have a hammer-wielding god on your side.
Is that a bow and arrow on his shoulder?
That does look like a bow and arrow.
We haven't seen them wielding projectile weapons so far.
Could he have picked up that bow from an enemy?
Yeah, potentially.
Here is the battle you died to attain! For heavy and for Asgard!
Wow, exciting stuff. I'm glad they took us into Asgard. That was really fun to see.
Bring in like the religion to it, because most of the stuff has been grounded really in like village life and raiding life.
Not too bad with the accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their outfits, the way they're portraying themselves with hair and tattoos, all seem relatively plausible.
And if not, fun to watch anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like
This is kind of mid. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like they didn't. I don't know if it's sexism or not, but they just felt unsure. They were being way too nice. Yeah. Oh, top of the hour, every hour, 6-second ad break.